Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different.
Mm.
We're going beyond the flashy interfaces, the stuff we can actually see and touch, you know, and we're
Right.
going straight to the core of software, like what makes it tick, what
Mm.
makes it work, and that is the world of software testing.
Yeah, it's like the foundation of a house.
Right,
You don't see it, but without it, the whole thing would just crumble.
exactly. And that's what makes today's topic so important. We're going to be taking apart this article called Writing Effective Software Test Cases. It's about making sure your software not just works, but it works the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, I think everybody who's listening to this has experienced buggy software at some point, whether it's an app that crashes during online checkout, or a frozen screen when you're trying to do something important,
Mm.
or just like that dreaded spinning wheel of doom.
Don't even get me started. I lost an entire online shopping cart once because of a glitch. So frustrating.
Yeah, and that's where well-written test cases come in.
Yeah, so let's back up a second. For someone who's never heard of a software test case before, what exactly is it? What are we talking about?
Okay, so imagine you're logging into your favorite app, right? A test case is like a detailed set of instructions that checks if that login process works perfectly every single time.
So it's not just clicking around and seeing if stuff works. It's like having an actual plan.
Exactly. It's kind of like a recipe. You wouldn't bake a cake without a recipe, right? So a test case outlines the ingredients, what we call inputs, the steps you follow, the actions, and most importantly, the expected result, which in this case would be like flawless functionality.
Okay, that makes sense. And the article mentions different types of test cases. Can you kind of walk us through those?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have your positive test cases, which would be like entering the correct username and password and expecting to log in successfully.
Right.
But then you also have negative test cases.
Negative test cases. So that's like intentionally trying to break the app.
Yeah, pretty much. You're trying to push the boundaries and see what happens. What if you enter the wrong password a bunch of times? Does it lock you out? What if you try to enter like special characters in the username field?
So you're basically trying to find all the ways the system could fail.
Exactly. Anticipating user errors, unexpected inputs, and anything that could potentially throw the software off track. By finding those weaknesses, we can fix them before they cause problems for real users.
It's like giving your software a stress test.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's the why of test cases.
Right.
But how do you actually write them effectively?
Well, the article kind of lays out a roadmap, and the first step is understanding the requirements. Like, let's say a requirement is that users should be able to reset their passwords via email.
Okay.
So how many different ways could a user interact with that?
Let me think. They might enter a valid email, an invalid email, one that's not even registered,
Mm.
or they might mistype it. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities.
Right, and you need to account for all those scenarios.
So you'd write a separate test case for each of those possibilities.
Exactly. Each one focuses on a specific objective, and it's not just about what we call the happy path, where everything goes perfectly. You need those negative test cases, like entering the wrong email on purpose.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thinking about all the times I've gotten like a vague error message or had a program crash on me, this is starting to make a lot more sense now.
And that's the power of effective testing. It's about preempting those frustrations and ensuring a seamless user experience. But it's not just about individual tests. It's about how they all fit together.
So there's a strategy here. There's a bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. How do these test cases map to the overall functionality of the software? How do they ensure you're meeting user needs and expectations?
So it's almost like a master plan for software quality.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's what we're going to explore further as we delve deeper into this article. So stay tuned as we unpack best practices, real-world examples, and even a case study where testing made a world of difference.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about understanding the requirements
Right.
and like thinking of all the different scenarios a user might encounter.
Yeah, and you were starting to touch on this idea of like the strategy behind it all, how all these test cases kind of fit together in this bigger picture of quality.
Right. It's kind of like if you were building a house, you wouldn't just start randomly hammering nails and laying bricks, would you?
Maybe if I was like 5 years old playing with blocks. But yeah, I see your point.
Exactly. You'd have like blueprints,
Yeah.
right? A plan to make sure the structure is sound and it meets its purpose. So in software, it's the same thing. You need that kind of strategic approach to testing.
Okay, so how do we create those blueprints for software quality?
Well, the article talks about some best practices, and one of them is modularity.
Modularity. Yeah, it's about breaking down the testing process into these manageable chunks. Like, think about organizing your kitchen cabinets. You wouldn't just throw all your pots and pans and utensils in one giant drawer, would you?
Oh, definitely not. That would be a disaster.
Yeah.
I like to have a place for everything. Like baking stuff in one cabinet, cooking tools in another. It just makes things easier to find.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And in software testing, we do the same thing. We group test cases by functionality. So you might have a module for login functionality, another for checkout processes, another for like notification features, and so on.
So instead of having this massive list of test cases, you're grouping them into these logical categories. Makes sense. Like having well-organized kitchen cabinets, but for your software testing.
Exactly. And it makes things a lot easier to manage and understand and maintain.
Okay, cool. And speaking of maintainability, the article also mentions reusability. What's that about? Is it like recycling old code? Haha, not quite. While recycling is good for the planet, in this context, reusability means creating these test components that you can use across different features and scenarios.
Okay.
Like, let's say you have a test case for verifying email formats, right? So that same test case could be used during user registration password reset, even when a user's updating their contact info.
So you're not reinventing the wheel every time.
Exactly. It's all about efficiency.
Right.
Right. But beyond all the technical stuff, one of the most important best practices is focusing on the user perspective.
Ah, yes. Like thinking about how people will actually interact with the software, not just whether the code works.
Exactly. You got to step into the user's shoes and think, how will they use this? What are they expecting? And how do you handle potential errors in a way that actually makes sense to them?
Yeah, because a developer might think an error message is perfectly clear, but a user might look at it and be totally confused.
Exactly. So testing from that user-centric perspective is super important. It helps you catch those usability issues and make the software, more intuitive, enjoyable to use.
Yeah, it's like doing the test run with a group of friends before you launch a new product.
Right.
You want to see how they actually interact with it.
That's a great analogy. And just like you wouldn't launch that product without getting feedback, you shouldn't launch software without testing it from the user's point of view.
This is all making so much more sense now. I used to think software testing was just this very technical behind-the-scenes thing.
Yeah.
But it's really about crafting a good experience for the end user.
Exactly. And speaking of real-world experiences, the article has this really interesting case study about a financial services company that had to kind of revamp their whole approach to testing.
Oh yeah, the agile project gone wrong. What happened there?
So basically, they were adopting these agile development methodologies, which meant they were releasing updates a lot faster. But their testing hadn't caught up. They were still using outdated test cases and not catching the new bugs that were popping up with each release.
So they were building the house faster, but the foundation wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the consequences were pretty bad. They had all these bugs popping up. Users were getting frustrated.
Well, that sounds like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, it was. And they realized they needed to completely change their approach.
Oh yeah.
So they held these workshops to get everyone on the same page about what needed to be tested. They implemented automated regression testing to free up time for more complex tests. And they adopted a test management tool to keep track of everything.
So it was a pretty big overhaul.
It was, but it was necessary. The results were amazing. They saw a 30% reduction in defects and a 50% improvement in testing efficiency.
Wow, that's huge. So it really shows how important it is to keep your testing in line with how you're developing the software.
Absolutely. Investing in the right tools and processes can really pay off when it comes to quality. But, even beyond the specifics, this case study shows that testing isn't just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
It's like a garden. You have to keep tending to it.
Exactly. You're constantly nurturing and refining your approach as the software grows and changes.
Yeah, it's a lot more dynamic than I thought. It's this constant dance between, making sure it works and making sure it's a good experience for the user.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. It's not just about finding bugs. It's about creating a digital experience that actually helps people and that they enjoy using. But before we go too far down that road, there's one more piece of this testing puzzle we need to talk about.
Ooh, mysterious. What's that?
It's about kind of stepping beyond the code itself and thinking about the bigger picture of what good testing can teach us.
Okay, now you've really got me intrigued. Let's dive into that after the break. Welcome back. We've been talking so much about software testing, and honestly, my whole view of it has changed. It's not just about, squashing bugs. It's about making sure things are actually good. you know?
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next. Remember that case study with the financial services company? How they had to like totally change their testing to keep up with Agile? That wasn't just about fixing code. It was about making quality a priority, like in their whole process.
Yeah, and it made me think, like, if a company can transform their whole way of working just by focusing on testing, maybe there are lessons there for, like, everyone, even people who don't work in tech.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The article actually talks about this. It challenges us to take those principles of good testing, that attention to detail, planning ahead, aiming for a smooth experience, and apply them to anything, not just software.
Okay, I like where this is going. Give me an example.
Yeah.
How could I use this testing mindset in, like, my everyday life?
All right, let's say you're planning a big event, like a wedding or a conference. You wouldn't just book a venue and hope for the best, would you?
Well, maybe when I was younger and less organized, but now, definitely not. I'd have a plan.
Exactly. And that plan, that's where the testing mindset comes in. You think about all the things that could go wrong, right? Like, what if the caterer cancels? What if it rains? What if twice as many people show up as you expected?
Okay, now I'm getting stressed just thinking about it. But I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's about being prepared, having a plan B, even a plan C, just in case.
Yeah. And it's not just about avoiding disasters. It's about making sure everyone has a good time. Right. Like, think about the seating chart for your wedding. You wouldn't just put people randomly at tables, would you?
Oh gosh, no. That would be chaos. You'd want to think about who gets along with who needs to be close to the front, all that stuff to make sure everyone's happy.
Right. You're anticipating those potential conflicts and designing a seating plan that works for everyone. And that's the testing mindset in action. It's all about planning ahead, thinking about the challenges, and aiming for a seamless experience, whether you're building software or organizing a wedding or even just planning a dinner party.
Wow, that's a really cool way to think about it. It's like a mental framework for approaching any project with more intention.
Exactly. And that's what the article's really getting at. Embrace that testing mindset, not just in your work, but in your life.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We started by breaking down what a software test case actually is and how to write one.
We talked about best practices, like keeping things modular, making test components reusable, and always thinking about the user.
We even looked at that case study where the company had to like totally revamp their testing to keep up with their development process.
And then we took it a step further and talked about how the principles of testing can apply to anything, not just software.
This deep dive has honestly been so eye-opening. Testing isn't just a technical task. It's a way of thinking that can help us be more successful in all areas of life.
And remember that quote from the article: quality is never an accident. It is always the result of intelligent effort.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me. It's a good reminder that if you want to create something truly excellent, it takes planning and effort and that testing mindset.
So as we wrap up, I want to challenge you. Think about how you can apply this testing mindset to your own work, your projects, even your personal goals.
Where can you be more intentional? Where can you anticipate challenges and have a backup plan? Where can you put yourself in the user's shoes and create a smoother experience?
Stay curious. Pay attention to the details. And always be striving to make things work flawlessly. You might be surprised at what you can achieve.
That's great advice. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.